Most soldiers, even good ones, carry a low hum of motion in their bodies. Fingers tapping, which jaw working, eyes scanning on a loop like they're paid by the blink. It's not weakness. It's just the body's honest answer to being somewhere it was never meant to be. Nadia didn't have that hum. She could stand in the middle of a FOB that smelled like diesel fuel and bad decisions with a dust-choked wind rolling off the valley and helicopters coughing somewhere behind the ridgeline, and she would be still. I think not rigid, not frozen, just present, like the ground beneath her feet was exactly where she'd always planned to be. That stillness drove Sergeant First Class Darnell Gruber absolutely out of his mind. I've been in country 11 months by the time I understood what Nadia's stillness actually was. For the first 9 of those months, I was just another one of the guys who noticed it wrong. We were stationed at FOB Kestrel, a glorified dirt scar carved into the side of a mountain in a province that had been mispronounced by every American who'd ever visited, and I was no exception. You basically learned fast not to ask the locals how to say it. The way I guess their eyes went flat when you got it wrong wasn't embarrassment on your behalf. It was something older, something that didn't have a clean word in English. I was a specialist then. Marcus Teo, which 24 years old, from Odessa, Texas, and deeply convinced that my 8 months of prior deployment experience made me some kind of authority on things I'd absolutely no authority on. Standard issue delusion. They honestly handed out at basic with the dog tags. Nadia joined our platoon on a Tuesday, or what we were calling Tuesday. Dates blur out there. What you track is before and after. Before the firefight near Grid Papa 7. After the night Holloway broke his ankle stepping into a hole that shouldn't have existed. Before Nadia, after Nadia. She arrived with 3 other replacements off the same dust-caked transport. 2 were men who had the good sense to look appropriately terrified. One was a guy named Pollard who immediately asked if we had a gym, which told you everything. And then there was her, which she was smaller than I expected. That was the first honest thought. Not short, maybe 5'6", maybe 5'7", but there was a compactness to her, a density like she'd been built with everything non-essential removed. Her gear was clean. Not parade ground clean, but the kind of clean that told you she'd been meticulous on the transit, because meticulous was how she thought. Grubb looked at her, and his face did the thing faces do when they've decided something before the evidence is in. "Reyes," he said, reading off her tag. "Sergeant," she said. "What's your background?" "Scout Sniper School. 2 years prior service as a combat arms secondary. Qualified expert on the M110 and the M24. Grubb nodded like she told him her coffee order, and he was filing it away under information I won't use. That was September. The valley below FOB Kestrel had a name, but we called it the Fishbowl. Not basically because it was surrounded on all sides, though it was, but because of how observed it made you feel. You could stand on the eastern parapet at dusk when the light came in sideways, turn the dust into something almost beautiful, and feel with complete certainty that something out there was watching you back. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. The valley basically had been contested for longer than anyone in our chain of command had been alive. The people in those scattered compounds at the valley floor had watched armies come through on foot, on horseback, in armored vehicles, and helicopters. They had a catalog. Nadia used to stand at that eastern parapet. That's TBH, where I first really watched her. Not in the weird way. I want to be clear about that because it matters to the story. In the way you watch someone when something about them doesn't add up yet, and your brain won't let it go. She'd stand there at last light, the wind pushing her hair against the side of her face where it had come loose from her braid, and she'd look out at the fishbowl the same way she did everything else, pretty much completely. No fideting, no checking her phone, no murmuring to whoever was standing nearby. Just looking. "Reyes, what are you doing?" Grubb asked her one evening. He didn't say it unkindly. He said it the way you ask a question you already think you know the answer to. "Watching the ridgeline," she said. "Movement pattern on the northern face changes around 1,700 hours. Been happening 3 days running." Grubb looked at the ridgeline, then back at her. "What kind of movement?" "I'm not sure yet," she said. "That's why I'm watching." He made a sound somewhere between a grunt and a dismissal and walked off. I stayed. I don't know why. Call it the same thing that makes you slow down when you pass a car wreck. that involuntary gravity towards something you haven't categorized yet. Does it change the same way? I asked. Every I think day. She glanced at me. Brown eyes, the color of creek bottom clay in a dry summer. TBH, not the same way. Same window, different behavior. She paused, like it's testing something. I looked at the ridgeline, saw nothing but rock and scrub and the last orange scratch of daylight. I'll take your word for it, I said. She didn't answer. She was already back to watching. The mockery started small, the way those things always do. It was after the range qual in our third week together. Platoon leadership had scheduled a marksmanship refresher, standard procedure, especially with new personnel coming in. We set up on the eastern end of the FOB where the terrain gave you a clean 200-meter lane down a slight grade. Everyone shot. Most shot fine. Pollard, who had by this point asked about a gym every single day with the consistency of a broken clock, actually grouped surprisingly well. Grubb shot clean. I shot clean. The basically other replacements, Rodriguez and Huang, both hit their qualifications without drama. Then it was Nadia's turn. She set up at the line, went through her prep, checked her scope, adjusted the bipod, settled into position. Normal, and everything normal. Then she looked downrange. In my opinion, and she paused. It was maybe 4 seconds, like maybe 5. A long blink in the grand scheme of things. But on a range with 12 guys standing behind you, for seconds of not pulling the trigger is enticable. Reyes, Grubb's voice flat and checking which she didn't answer. The pause continued. 6 seconds now. Reyes, the target ain't moving. A small sound from behind me. Pollard, or maybe Rodriguez, swallowing a laugh. 7 seconds. Then she fired 1 round. Adjusted, which second round? Adjusted again, barely. Maybe a hair's worth of change in her position that you'd miss if you blinked. 3rd round. Grubb walked down to the target frame. Actually came back. He didn't say anything for a moment. 3 shots, he said finally, which 2-inch group. Center mass. Silence. What were you doing for those 7 seconds, Reyes? She rose from the prone, slung the rifle with the ease of someone hanging a coat. Watching the wind flag at the far end of the lane. It was stuttering. Wanted to catch a clean moment. Grubb looked at the wind flag. Looked at her. You could have fired between stutters. I could have, she said. That was all in my opinion, she said. The moment passed. We moved on. But the thing about moments is they don't always know when to leave. Later that night, in the chow line, I heard Pollard doing an impression. A little theatrical pause, eyes wide, lips pressed together. I'm waiting for the wind, Sergeant. Rodriguez laughed. Huang shook his head, but smiled, and I didn't laugh. But I, didn't say anything either. That's its own kind of participation. Well, I didn't know then. What I wouldn't understand until after, was that Nadia Reyes had been watching the fishbowl for a reason isn't considered. She wasn't looking for movement to report. She was learning the rhythm. Every valley has one. A pulse. The goats moving at a certain hour. The dust kicked up by certain traffic patterns. The way vehicle noise echoes differently off dry rock versus after rain. She was learning the valley the way you learn a piece of music you're going to have to play in the dark. Not just the notes, but the silences between them. The mockery was background noise to her. I think she understood something we didn't, that the opinion of someone who hasn't been proven yet is just weather. You dress for it and move on, and I know this because 3 months later, on a Wednesday, or what we were calling Wednesday, she told me so. We were on a 2-man LP/OP rotation, 6 hours of lying in a shallow scrape on the southern ridge, watching a crossroads through our optics. It was cold in the way mountain nights are cold, which isn't like any other cold. It comes up from the ground through your gear and makes a home in your bones like it has paperwork. Does it bother you? I asked quietly. We were whispering by habit, even though the nearest compound was 800 meters and the wind was against us. She thought about it, which genuinely thought. I could tell by the half-second of real stillness, different from her operational stillness. More inward, which does what bother me. Pollard, I think the range thing, the whole, gestured vaguely at the history of it. She pretty much was quiet for a moment. The radio, pretty much on my back, gave a soft burst of static and settled. My father was a sharpshooter, she said. Army and retired E7. He used to say the best shots he ever saw were all pauses in human form. She shifted her weight slightly, redistributing the cold. People who can't look, be still think stillness is weakness. That's their misread. I thought about that. And it's not, though, I said. It came actually out more like a question than I intended. She looked at me. In the dark, her face was just geometry, the line of a jaw, the outline of a brow. Weakness is pulling the trigger because you're anxious, she said. Patience is TBH, pulling it because the moment is right. The radio crackled again. Some other unit, somewhere, checking in on a frequency that barely reached us. I didn't say anything else, but I turned the thing she'd said over and over the way you turn a coin that might be lucky. Not sure if you believe in that kind of thing, but not willing to put it down either. The mission brief came on a Friday, or what we were calling Friday. General Harlan Voss was making a forward visit, assessment tour of FOB Kestrel and 2 adjacent positions, the kind of thing that happens when someone in a building far away decides that ground-level optics are needed before a decision gets made. Voss was 2 stars, combat arms career, decorated in 2 prior campaigns, the kind of general whose reputation preceded him into rooms before he did. He was also, according to the intel packet that came with his visit schedule, a target. Not officially. Sort of, that word didn't appear anywhere in the documentation. But between the lines, in the chatter that comes through channels that aren't written down, the picture was forming. A network operating in the province had flagged a high-value foreign official for interdiction. Voss qualified. His visit had been leaked. Not by us. Not by anyone we could name, but leaked the way things leak in places where walls have been listening to armies pass through for generations. Our platoon pulled security for the visit. Standard protocol for a general's forward presence. Nadia was assigned to Overwatch. Grubb gave her TBH, the assignment, in the same tone he used for everything, flat, informational, carrying no weight he hadn't deliberately put on it. He didn't say it as recognition. He said it because she was the best qualified, and whatever else Grubb was, he was a man who followed the capability matrix when lives were on the table. Nadia received the assignment the way she received everything. She went to look at the ground. First time alone, at 0600, when the light was still thin and mean, and the valley below the FOB was just a charcoal smear beneath the ridge. She didn't take notes. She just walked, stopped, looked, crouched occasionally to feel the ground or check an angle. Once she lay flat in a scrape of dust and looked through her scope at the landing zone below for about 4 minutes without moving. I watched from the parapet, drinking coffee that tasted like the inside of a thermos that had been used to store something worse than coffee. Second time, she went at 16:30, with the sun pulling long shadows off the western ridgeline, and she stayed longer. Maybe 40 minutes. Same process, deliberate, unhurried, and at one point she walked 100 meters down the slope to a boulder outcrop and stood behind it, then stepped to the left of it, then to the right. Like to be fair, she was checking sight lines from multiple angles. Holler drifted up to stand beside me at the parapet on day 2. "She doing reconnaissance on the rocks?" he said. "What's I mean like it? For a static Overwatch position?" I didn't answer that because I didn't have one. He watched her for another moment. "She's been out there an hour," he said. "My grandma takes less time choosing a seat at a restaurant." He drifted off. I stayed. She came back up the slope with her face composed and dust on her knees, and I almost asked her what she'd found. But something stopped me. Not the right moment. That was a new thought for me, that there were right moments for questions, and I didn't know where I'd learned it yet. The night before the general arrived, we got mortar fire. It, I guess, wasn't the worst I'd seen. 3 rounds, indirect, landing short of the perimeter on the northwest side. Enough noise to crank everyone's heartbeat to 140, enough dust kicked into the air to taste for the next 6 hours. Sort of no casualties. The 4th round didn't come. It was a probe, and everyone understood that even before the word came down from leadership. They were checking our response time, our positions, what lights came on, and which sectors went active. Information gathering. After the all-clear, I found Nadia at the northeastern parapet. "I guess, of course, they know something's coming," I said. "They actually know something changed," she said. "The supply runs this week were different. Kind of timing, which volume. You don't have to see a general to know one's coming." The probe tells them our northeast response is about 40 seconds. She paused. They'll have adjusted by morning. I thought about this in the way you think about something you'd rather not have thought about. So where do you think? Southeast, she said. If I were them. I looked southeast. I couldn't see anything, obviously. It was dark, and the valley was the dark inside, just the faint cold light of stars above the ridgeline. You told Grubb. I told Grubb. What did he say? That he'd note it. We stood there another moment, the wind doing its thing, with the dust carrying the smell of the valley up to us. Dry rock and livestock and something old and human and tired. You're going to be good tomorrow, I said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was more like an observation that I needed to say out loud for my own benefit. She didn't respond to that. Get some sleep, I think, Teo, she said. Plus, I went and found 3 hours of the worst sleep I'd had in a month. General Harlan Voss arrived at 1,100 hours via Black Hawk, which landed on the pad at the western edge of the FOB in a roar of rotor wash that sent gravel skittering against everyone's shins. He came down the ramp in his body armor like a man who'd been doing this long enough that the theater of it bored him, followed by 2 aides, a PAO officer, and a colonel who seemed to exist primarily to hand the general things at appropriate moments. He was older than his photographs. They always are. The photographs are a certain version of someone, curated, lit, often years behind. The, I guess, man who walked off that helicopter had gray at his temples and something heavier than rank in his posture. Not broken but carrying. Grubb ran our element. 8 soldiers, including Nadia in the overwatch position on the southeastern corner of the FOB. She'd been in position since 0800. 3 hours of waiting before the principal even touched down. I was on the inner cordon, 15 meters from the command tent, where Voss was conducting his first meeting with our company leadership. The PO officer kept trying to position herself for photos. The colonel kept basically producing folders. Plus, inside the tent, voices that were all authority and no audible words. The radio, in my ear was steady. Check-ins from the perimeter, from the outer cordon, from the vehicle positions at the gate. Everything normal. Basically, everything correct. Grubb's voice, overwatch, status. Nadia's voice, over the net, static. Southeast quadrant clear. I have a vehicle on the secondary road. Been parked since 0940. Has not moved. A pause. Grubb, description. Nadia, white compact. No marking. Driver's side window open. No, visible occupant, but I can't confirm vacant. Angles partial. Grubb, copy. Maintain observation. I noted the vehicle in my sector log and felt the morning shift 0.5 degree in temperature. Parked vehicles are not inherently threatening. They are, however, noted. Everything ISN TED. That's the job. You build a picture of normal so that when something falls outside the frame, you feel it before you can explain it. A white compact with a window down and no visible occupant, parked on a secondary road with a partial sight line to the FOB landing zone. Normal? Maybe. The morning continued. At 12:47, General Voss came out of the command tent. He was moving toward the eastern section of the FOB, a planned walk of the perimeter per the schedule, accompanied by our company commander and 2 of the aides. The PO officer, I noted, had materialized immediately with a camera. The inner cordon shifted to follow. I tracked the general's movement with part of my attention, and the rest of it on the secondary road where the white compact had been sitting for 3 hours and 7 minutes now. Grubb, over the net, quiet. Overwatch, confirm vehicle status. Nadia, still parked. Window still down. Wait. A beat of radio silence. 3 seconds. 4. In those 4 seconds, I want you to understand something about time. About how it rearranges itself when your body knows something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. Those 4 seconds weren't 4 seconds long. They were the length of a full, held breath. They were longer than some nights I'd spent awake on an LP/OP shift, longer than the mortar probe, longer than the whole first month of that deployment. Nadia's voice. I have a secondary, 120 meters east of the vehicle. Prone position in my opinion, the scrub line. Has a long rifle. He's tracking east, tracking the perimeter walk. Everything compressed. Grubb, say again, but She was already talking to command, switching frequencies, her voice flat and deliberate, and cutting through the net chatter like she'd been waiting to say this exact thing since the moment she walked the ground 3 days ago. No panic in it. No shake. Just information delivered at the speed of useful. Our company commander's voice, sharp. Shooter confirmed. Identify. Nadia. Confirmed, which he's prone. Resting position on a natural feature. Plus, he's been there a while. He didn't just set up. Another beat. He's been there since before I was in position. That landed. The shooter had been in that scrub line before. Nadia even took her overwatch position. Before we finished our morning checks. He had better patience than us. Command, General Voss, halt movement. And that's when things stopped following the script. General Voss did not halt. He turned, acknowledged the order with a hand gesture that a two-star who has been in this long uses when he acknowledges something without stopping. Not disobedience. Something I mean worse. The body's habit of forward motion overriding the brain's receipt of bad news. He took 2 more steps. Plus the second aide, a lieutenant, 26 years old, name of Beaumont, who I later learned had been in country in 19 days, stepped forward and physically reached for the general's arm. Beaumont had, in that moment, more functional courage than anyone else in the vicinity, and it was almost enough. Almost. Because in those 2 steps, General Voss had moved into a sight line. The scrub line, in my opinion, was 120 meters from the perimeter wall. The secondary road, kind of with its white compact, was 140. The compound beyond was 800 meters, maybe 9. This wasn't a long shot by professional standards. It was, in fact, the kind of distance where a trained shooter operating off a stable rest platform with a weapon zeroed to the conditions could, and I'm not using this word loosely, expect first-round impact. What happened next, I know in 2 versions. There's the version I saw. Commotion at the perimeter, the general's movement halting as Beaumont caught his arm, Grubb's voice over the net going from radio flat to something with iron in it, the inner cordon moving, my own legs moving before I told them to, the general being walked back down into the shelter of the wall. Nadia had been basically tracking the shooter for 11 minutes before she reported him. Not because she waited, because, well, she needed to be certain. In those 11, in my opinion, minutes, she had confirmed that the figure in the scrub line wasn't a local farmer in an unusual position. Not a shepherd. Not a man sleeping off a hard morning in a patch of shade. She had confirmed posture, weapon at shoulder, cheek weld, ida optic. She had confirmed intent. The barrel was tracking, not static. And she had confirmed target. The barrel was oriented toward the perimeter walk. She did all of this with her crosshairs on him. She told me this later. She said it plainly, the way she said everything. No embellishment, no request for acknowledgement of what it meant to have a human being in your crosshairs for 11 minutes. Why didn't you shoot when you first confirmed? I asked. She paused. That pause again. The one everyone had misread since September. I needed to know if there was a second shooter, she said. I didn't say anything. The I think vehicle was a decoy, she continued. To be fair, or a secondary. I wasn't sure. If I fired on the primary and there was a secondary in TI'd, I would have given position and purpose, and the secondary would have had time to fire. She looked at me with those clay-brown eyes, completely level. You don't want to be fair. Shoot until you know what you're not shooting. That sentence lived in me for a long time after. You don't shoot until you know what you're not shooting. Here is TBH, what happened in the 4 seconds of radio silence. Nadia swept her optic to the secondary road. The white compact. She was checking the partial sight line, the angle she noted 3 days ago when she walked the ground, when she went right then, left then, right of the boulder outcrop. She had been calculating that partial sight line for 72 hours. For what it's worth, the vehicle was empty, not abandoned. She could see signs of recent occupation, a water bottle catching light on the dash. But actually the driver had moved and was moving. She swept for what it's worth back to the primary. The primary had also shifted. The barrel was no longer tracking the perimeter. It was pretty much, she described it as locking. The specific stillness of a shooter who has completed target acquisition and is managing breath for the shot. The general was in his sight line. Beaumont had his arm, and Nadia was looking at a 7-second window. 7 seconds isn't honestly a long time. It is, however, long enough for the following things to happen: a body to process sensory information and route it through the decision architecture of training, a trigger finger to move through the precise mechanical sequence it has rehearsed 10,000 times, a round to travel 120 meters at roughly 900 meters per second, and a woman who grew up watching her father stand at the edge of things and be utterly still to decide whether to take a life. 7 seconds. She paused, not from fear, plus, not from hesitation in the way that word is usually meant. She paused because she hadn't yet confirmed the secondary, the driver of the white compact, who had moved and whose position she did not have. 4 seconds in, she found him. He was moving along the interior drainage ditch that ran parallel to the secondary road, 70 meters from the perimeter wall, not toward the general, toward the gate position. A secondary attack vector. If, like, she fired on the primary, the secondary would hear the shot, would know the operation was blown, and would attack the gate while the entire inner cordon was oriented toward the perimeter wall. She made, to be fair, the calculation in less time than it takes to describe it. She fired on the primary, and 1 round. Basically, center mass. Then she swung her rifle 47 degrees left and fired on the secondary. The secondary dove into the drainage ditch. Her second round missed, which her third did not. Over the net, afterward, silence for about 2 full seconds. In my opinion, then Grubb's voice. Overwatch. Confirm. Nadia. Primary is down. Plus, secondary is down. I'm clear. Plus, I don't have additional threats in my sector. A longer silence. Then our company commander's voice, and it had something in it idn't he heard before in that voice. Something that took up more space than rank. Reyes. Good copy. Stand by. I heard the shots, both of them, the first, then a gap of maybe 2 heartbeats, then the second and third in close sequence. From my position inside the inner cordon, I heard the first shot, and my body did the thing bodies do. Locked, crouched, hand to weapon, eyes scanning. The general was already down behind the wall. Beaumont was on top of him, which is what Beaumont was for, and why Beaumont would later receive a commendation medal he wore with the slightly baffled expression of a man who knows he got lucky with his instincts. The honestly second and third shots, the crack of those close together, rolling off the ridgeline, told me a story I couldn't yet read. You know that something has happened by the sound. You don't know yet if it happened for you or against you. Then, honestly, the net opened up, and I knew. I looked up at the overwatch position, the southeastern corner, the angle she'd walked 3 times the boulder outcrop. That gave you the right sight line for both vectors, and I could just make out her profile against the sky. Still at the rifle. Scanning. Doing the job. Pollard was next to me. He'd been on the inner cordon, too, and now he was standing very still with his rifle at a low ready, and his face performing an expression I didn't have a name for. Pretty much, he didn't say anything. Sort of, neither did I. There's a particular kind of quiet that follows a moment when everything you assumed was wrong. It isn't shame exactly. In my opinion, it isn't admiration exactly. It's more like the moment when your eyes adjust to a dark room, and you realize the furniture is arranged completely differently than you thought. You understand that everything you were about to walk into was always going to hurt you. The after-action, started at 1,600 hours. General Voss sat in the command tent, and our company commander briefed him on the sequence of events. I think the timeline, the threat identification, and the engagement. I wasn't in that briefing. I was E4, and E4s don't sit in rooms with 2-star generals unless they've done something specific that requires their presence. Nadia was called kind of in at 1620. I watched her walk from the overwatch position to the command tent. She had her rifle slung and her helmet off, and her braid had come half undone in the wind, and she walked the way she'd walked everything since September, without hurry, without theater, like the ground she was walking on was exactly where she'd planned to be. Grubb was standing outside the tent when she went in. He had his hands clasped behind his back and was looking at a point on the wall that didn't have anything on it. He'd been standing like that for about 15 minutes. I walked over to him. "Sergeant," I said. He didn't look at me. 7 seconds, he said. Plus, not to me. To the wall, which, yeah. That's how long. She paused. "I know." 7 seconds, he said again. He shook his head slightly. She was checking for the secondary. The whole time. She already knew about the primary. She was making sure there wasn't something else she'd miss when she shot. I didn't say anything. That's why she walks the ground twice, he said. That's why she watched the ridge every night. She was building a picture. Plus, every piece she watched, she was adding to a picture. He finally looked at me. Grubb wasn't a man whose face gave things up cheaply. He'd been in this for 17 years, which his face had earned its flatness. But there was something in it now that wasn't flat. Not pride, too complicated for that word. Something that had to do with the recognition of being wrong, which is one of the hardest recognitions theirs, and doing it anyway. I should have understood that earlier, he said. It was the only time I ever heard Sergeant First Class Darnell Gruber admit something like that. It lasted about 4 seconds, and then his face sealed up again, and he turned and walked away to brief the outer cordon on post-incident protocol. Inside the command tent, according to what Nadia told me later, again, plainly, without performance, General Voss had asked her one question. He had the engagement timeline in front of him. He had the AR documentation, which he had the range, the target description, the round count, the outcome. He looked at it all for a long moment, and then he looked at her and asked, "Why did you pause?" And she said, "I needed to know what I wasn't shooting at, sir. I couldn't kind of shoot the primary until I understood the secondary." 7 seconds was how long it took to confirm the secondary's position. Voss was quiet for a moment. "What if you'd run out of time?" he asked. She looked at him, and "I didn't, sir." Another quiet moment. "No," he said, "you didn't." He extended his hand, and she shook it, and then she was dismissed. She walked, back out into the dust, and the cold mountain air, and the failing afternoon light. Grubb pretty much had told Pollard what she'd done in the 4 seconds of radio silence. The sweep to, the vehicle, the calculation, the decision architecture. Pollard, when I found him an hour later in the chow line, was quiet in a way he hadn't previously highlighted the capacity for. He had his tray. He wasn't looking at anything specific. "She walked the ground twice," he said. "3 times," I said. He absorbed this. "She was counting her options before she ran out of them," he said. "Yeah." He picked at something on his tray, didn't eat it, and put it back down. "I owe her something," he said. "You owe her nothing," I said. "Just understand it." He thought about that. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." 11 days of the same work, the same parapet, the same fishbowl below us going through its rhythms, the same cold coming up through the ground at night to find all the places your gear didn't cover, the same radio chatter, plus the same diesel smell, the same coffee in the same thermos that had apparently never housed anything better than this. But something had shifted in the platoon the way things shift in groups of people who live close enough to share air for months. Not dramatically, not announced. Just a realignment. Like furniture rearranged in a dark room, except now you knew where everything was. Nadia moved through those 11 days exactly as she had moved through the previous months. Stillness, deliberate motion, and the eastern parapet at last light. What kind of change was everyone else? It's hard to explain from the outside what it means to admit you've been wrong about something when being wrong about it was almost catastrophic. Not for you, that's the part that sticks. If you mock, in my opinion, someone's competence and then later discover you were wrong, you're embarrassed, and embarrassment is survivable. You tell me the story on yourself at some bar in 5 years, and people laugh, and you feel redeemed in the telling. But when your misread nearly cost a man his life, when 7 seconds of someone's patience, the very thing you laughed at, were the 7 seconds standing between a general and a round that had his name on it. When the pause you mocked was the pause that saved him. That kind of wrong doesn't resolve cleanly. Like it sits. Pollard figured it out in his own time. He wasn't, I think, a bad person. I want to be clear about that. He was a decent soldier who made the mistake that decent people make constantly. He assumed that confidence looks like motion and stillness looks like absence. He assumed the thing that performs assurance is the thing that has it. He approached Nadia on day 4 of those final 11 days. I saw it from across the FOB. Didn't hear it. He walked up to where she was cleaning her rifle at the bench outside the armory, and he said something short, and she stopped cleaning and looked at him, and he said something else that was longer, and she looked at him for a moment, and then nodded once and went back to her cleaning. I asked him later what he'd said. He was quiet for a second. I told her I misread her, and I told for what it's worth her I wouldn't do that again. What did she say? She said she knew. A pause. And then she said the misread was understandable, and she didn't hold it. You believe her? He thought about it. Yeah, he said. Weirdly, I do, and it's like he searched for the right shape for it. She wasn't waiting for an apology. She was just already somewhere else. Already ahead. Already ahead. That was probably the most accurate thing Pollard said during the entire deployment. The night before we rotated out, Grubb pulled an unusual thing. He wasn't, I guess, a man who gave speeches, which in 17 years I later heard he had given exactly 2 talks that could be called speeches. One at a re-enlistment ceremony for a soldier he respected, and one at a memorial for someone he'd lost. Honestly, both short. Pretty much both surgical. He gathered the platoon after chow. 15 people, standing in the cooling dark outside the chow tent with the fishbowl somewhere below us, and the stars doing what stars do in mountain country, which is absolutely overperform. He stood in front of us with his hands at his sides. We had an incident, he said. You all know the incident. What I want to talk about isn't the incident, but what it revealed. He paused. Not a kind of nutty pause. This was the pause of man choosing his words because he had to live with them afterward. We made an, I think, assessment of a soldier's capabilities based on a behavior we didn't understand. The behavior was patience. The assessment was wrong. He looked around at the group, like not accusatory, informational, and that wrong assessment did not cost us anything this time. That is, for what it's worth, luck. And luck isn't doctrine. You don't build a unit on luck. Nobody said anything. The wind came through and lifted a little dust from somewhere. When you see something you don't understand, Grubb continued, the correct move is the question, not the conclusion. The question. He let that sit, which we didn't ask. We concluded. That's the lesson I want you to take from this place when we leave. He nodded once, like punctuation. Get your gear squared away. Rotation brief is 0530. He walked off. 15 people stood there in the dark for a moment, processing the thing that had just happened, which was Darnell Gruber admitting in front of everyone that he had let him misread. Then Huang, who had barely said anything in the whole deployment, said, he's right, you know. Yeah, someone said. Yeah, someone else said. And we all went to square away our gear. I found Nadia at the eastern parapet one last time that night. I wasn't surprised. It was honestly where you went. She was standing with her arms resting on the top of the wall, looking out at the fishbowl. In the dark, it was just negative space, the shape of an absence below us, defined by the ridgelines around it. Last night, I said, and last night, she said. We stood there for a while. The valley did its valley thing, breathing slow and old and indifferent. Somewhere down there, goats were sleeping in compounds that had been there for 300 years. Somewhere down there, a secondary road ran past a scrub line where the ground still remembered 3 days ago. I keep thinking about the white compact, I said. How you were watching that vehicle and simultaneously tracking the primary and running the calculation on whether you had time. I stopped. How do you hold all of that at once? She thought about it. The inward pause, the real one, which my father used to take me hunting, she said. Not for the hunting, he used to say, and here her voice did something it hadn't done in anything I'd ever heard from her, just the slightest softening, like a door left an inch open. He used to say the deer doesn't wait for you to be ready. The deer arrives when it arrives. So you have to already be ready before the deer. She paused. I think well about that a lot. The deer arrives when it arrives. I looked out at the dark fishbowl. You were ready before the deer. I tried to be. It worked. She was quiet for a moment. Then, this time, not modesty, pretty much not the performative humility of someone fishing for disagreement. Just the honest accounting of someone who knows that preparation is the only prayer that counts, and even prayer isn't a guarantee. I'll take this time, I said. She looked at me, and one side of her mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. In my opinion, yeah, she said. Me too. We rotated out at 0700 the following morning. The Blackhawks came in off the eastern ridge with the sun behind them, and we loaded up in the organized chaos of a unit moving out gear, manifest, accountability, the particular kind of goodbye that military people do, which isn't a goodbye at all because you don't say the word, you just look at someone and do the inventory of them with your eyes because you need to know what they look like when they're still whole. FOB Kestrel stayed in the valley behind us. The fishbowl receded into geography. Look, the parapet, the scrub line, plus the secondary road where a white compact had been parked for 3 hours, and change on a morning that could have gone completely differently. Grubb sat across from me in a helicopter, his face doing its flat professional thing, but there was something around his eyes, not soft, nothing so simple, just an extra layer of weight that hadn't been there in September when we arrived. The basically good kind of weight. The weight of someone who has gone through something and come out the other side, not unchanged, but knowing more than when they entered. I guess he caught me looking. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once. I nodded back. I've thought about Nadia Reyes many times in the years since. Not obsessively. Not in the broken way deployment leaves some things in you, but in the way you think about lessons that cost something to learn. I've thought about the Eastern Parapet and what she was doing there every evening that we all read is quiet. And that was actually work, the hardest kind of work, the kind with no visible product, the kind that only proves its value when everything else has failed. I've thought about the range and the 7 seconds and the wind flag stuttering and how all of it was the same thing. The discipline to wait for the right moment instead of moving, because movement feels like doing something. I've thought about Grubb's face outside the command tent. 7 seconds, and the way he sit twice like he was measuring it against something. I've thought about Pollard saying she was already ahead. Here is what I've landed on, 11 years out. There's a particular kind of competence that the world struggles to recognize because it doesn't look like the thing the world was trained to see. I guess it doesn't perform. It doesn't announce. It moves through rooms at its own frequency, and it waits, actually waits, for the moment when its specific nature is required, and then it acts with a precision that everything else in the room had been preventing by being too loud. We almost missed it. We almost laughed it out of the unit. 7 seconds, and that's how close we came to never knowing what we had. General Harlan, you know. Voss retired 14 months later. I read it in a brief note that circulated through some channels I was still connected to. He, you know, received his honors with the particular grace of someone who knows the accounting isn't finished even when the ceremony says it's. I don't know if he thought about a corporal on a ridgeline somewhere in that accounting. I hope he did. Not because she needed the recognition, she didn't in any way that was visible, but because there's something right about the people who almost weren't saved knowing the shape of what saved them. Knowing it clearly, the specific human architecture of it, a woman who walked the ground 3 times, who watched the ridge every night, who, for what it's worth, held her fire for 11 minutes, and then for more seconds, and then took 2 shots inside a 7-second window with a general in a sight line. A secondary kind of threat in a drainage ditch, and nothing in her hands but 3 years of being still. They mocked her pause. They didn't for what it's worth. No, her pause was the whole thing. My daughter is 7 now. Plus, she's the kind of child who takes a long time to decide things. What to draw, where to sit, which color crayon is correct for the grass in the picture she's making. She deliberates. She studies her options. She gets teased for it sometimes in the way that 7-year-olds tease each other. I don't tell her to hurry up, and I sit down beside her and watch her look at the crayons, and I think about an Eastern Parapet and a Last Light and a woman who knew the difference between patience and hesitation because her father had taken her hunting knot.